Every good ski season has to come to an end. Time to put away the skis and move on. But if you are a tabletop gamer and your heroes are moving through a snowy land, it might just be time to make some skis. I cut the boards for my skis from a 1/4-inch thick piece of poplar using a kitchen knife. The poplar turned out to be a poor choice. The kitchen knife worked well because it's not so sharp that it cuts through the grain. I started the cut for each board with the tap of my hand on the back of the knife blade, then simply pushed through the wood until the board came off. I'll further explore this and other techniques for making boards in an upcoming video on wagon building. Skis are not flat. They bend up at the tip and are cambered beneath the foot. Here is where my tea kettle, still hot from heating water for my morning coffee, provides an opportunity to try steaming and bending wood. Alas, this is the point in the process where poplar proves a poor choice. For this process, I am going to ignore the camber of the foot, but I am going to try to bend the tip of the ski upward. To do this, I will wrap the poplar around a dowel and hold it in place with a clamp while it cools and dries. If you are going to make a lot of skis for your miniatures, I suggest producing a jig that will make this step a lot easier. You can hear the poplar tell me it does not want to bend into the shape of a ski. Despite my misgivings about poplar, I waited the wood to cure and moved on to the poles. Simple pins are the right size for the poles, but they are the wrong kind of material. The smooth metal needs to be scarified with a file to hold paint. And because I do not plan to have Thorvald hold these poles, he doesn't have a free hand. I plan to have them on his back, which means that the points will be free in the air. I use the same file to flatten those points so that I don't get poked every time I pick the miniature up. The pin heads come off with diagonal cutters, and I'm ready to add handles with baking soda and superglue. As I'm making these poles, I am thinking of the old bamboo poles that my father used to cross-country ski for years when I was a child. I imagine the grips for those poles were made by wrapping the bamboo with leather, but they had a sort of granular appearance, and I think that this baking soda method will give a similar appearance. I'll use simple thread to produce the pole straps. A little pile of baking soda on the parchment paper makes it easier to reach. I also find that getting superglue directly from the bottle to where I want it to go with these small pieces is very difficult, so a little drop on the parchment paper is also easier. This way I can dip the thread into the pool of superglue and then put the pole and the thread together into the baking soda. It's still pretty tricky and requires some patience. At first I tried to get the whole loop done at once, but I soon found that doing one end at a time was much more effective. Success. Fortunately, right after getting the loops to fit on the poles, I discovered that my poplar boards had cracked rather than bent. Time to try something different. Oak to the rescue. The tea kettle is still hot from a second brewing of coffee. I hope that all of these Valkyries don't wake my sleeping family this morning. Just look how well this porous wood bends. And I only had to steam it for about 5 minutes, although I am certain that that will vary with the water content of the wood and how big the pores are. I'm so awkward still with this clamp and dowel technique that I hardly want you to see what I'm doing. We'll leave these to cure and dry. There are more than 2 of them, in case some break. Back to the poles. I've got to visualize how they will fit on Thorvald's pack. I also need to fix that broken strap. I remember watching my dad replace the leathers that held the metal rings to his poles and created the baskets at the bottom of each pole. For these poles, for Thorvald, I used chipboard from cereal box instead of leather, and jewelry jump rings for the metal rings at the end of the pole. These pieces of chipboard need to be very short, as they reach only from one side of the ring to the other. But I wouldn't be able to handle something so small and wrap it around the metal, so I made them much longer. Getting the pin through the chipboard was kind of difficult, and I think in retrospect it might be easier to use a pin vise and drill a hole. Once they were in place, I used Superglue to secure the leather straps. I'll cut them off later. Back in the day, my dad used brass rivets to secure the leather on his baskets. The holes in this board that I use to hold miniatures that are mounted on corks for painting is convenient for holding the poles in place as the glue cures. Diagonal cutters once again proved to be the solution for cutting off the excess length. I have now shaped 2 serviceable poles that Thorvald will strap uselessly to the back of his pack. Time to paint them. I'll start with a thin layer of dark brown, hoping that this will be a good undercoat for subsequent layers of paint. Because the pins I used for the shafts of these poles are meant to look like bamboo, but are smooth and have no details, I'll have to rely on paint to give the appearance of bamboo. Back to the skis. My oak is bent and dry enough to start working with. I'm sure that somebody used to bending wood could do a much better job, but these will suffice for this miniature. These pieces of wood are, of course, far too large to make skis for such a small miniature. However, they do give me the idea that it would be fun to make a sleigh at some point. I want the bend at the tip of each ski to be the same. If I cut both skis from the same piece of wood, then it should match, and since this wood is wide enough, that's what I'll do. Of course, I don't need the skis to bend this far, so I will cut the tip of bent wood off, leaving only a slight curl. Always check with the miniature to make sure I'm getting the scale correct. Working with wood this small is a lot like painting a miniature, in that it is better to use many small layers or many small cuts to avoid cutting oneself rather than going all at once and making big blobby clumps, whether of paint or bodily fluids. Now just a bit of whittling to get the skis into shape. I thought about adding a knob at the front of the ski and a notch at the back to allow for the attachment of mountain climbing skins. Of course, they couldn't actually be attached because the skis will be in place on the miniature permanently. The method for cutting these boards results in many wonderful ridges, but that does require that I flatten a spot for the miniature's foot to fit on each ski. Now to free Thorvald from the base he was molded on. I actually like this base and I'll save it for some other project. A moment later, and he stands for the first time on his new pair of skis. Now back to the poles. I've got to create the appearance of leather and bamboo. I use yellow with a bit of brown to base coat both the pole for the bamboo and the leather straps. As planned, I use black for the grips on each pole. And while that dries, I add some strong tone wash to emphasize the ridges on my skis. To give the bamboo its distinctive segmented look, I paint rings of brown periodically down its length to show shadows under each knob and yellow above to give a highlight. The straps on the pole handles don't show up enough against the black, and so I paint them with brown and then highlight them with yellow. Time to mount up. A dab of superglue gets Thorvald and his skis. A little more strong tone wash will blend the colors on the ski poles together. With the superglue holding the ski in the position I want, I use a pin vise to drill a hole through the ski and into the miniature's foot. I'll then place a metal pin in the hole, and that will make the connection much stronger. I place the pin, then cut it off, and then add superglue. Now I can attach the skiing figure to a metal washer for the base. Jewelry jump rings cut into thirds will make good bindings if I can just get them in the right position. They keep sticking to my tweezers. The poles can't just rest on Thorvald's pack. I need something to attach them together. Maybe a bit of rope. I've mixed up some white glue and flocking to make snow for the base. I take some care to get it under the tip of the ski, as gliding over the snow is the whole purpose of the skis. Snow doesn't always fall over a uniform flat plane. A little bit of vegetation covered by flocking will give a natural appearance. I cringe a little using this tuft of grass this way, but I think the effect is so nice that it is worth it. Of course, there is snow in between the skis, and since Thorvald has been out in the snow with all of his gear trudging through the wilderness, it probably has settled some on his equipment as well. I imagine he's been skiing through snowy woods, bumping into trees, and knocking snow down on himself from the branches. A little bit of black paint around the base to frame the miniature, and Thorvald will be ready to explore the snowy world. Thanks for watching.